The Seattle Mariners are not signing a free agent shortstop.
What?
Or at least, that's kind of the sentiments I got from this interview. The GM meetings just concluded in Las Vegas last week, and we got some interesting interviews with some of the biggest names in baseball in terms of the front office, including our very own Jerry Dipoto. Now, Jerry Dipoto kind of doubled down on the idea that JP Crawford is the Mariners shortstop. And I actually think he may have even nixed the idea of the Mariners spending a whole lot of money on one of these four big-name shortstops in Carlos Correa, Trea Turner, Xander Bogaerts, and Dansby Swanson. Take a listen to what Jerry had to say at the GM meetings, and then let's get back to looking at this.
Is this the right time to make that next big investment in free agency to really fortify this team for the future?
You know, I've always seen free agency as a way to augment a good team. And between Julio Rodriguez and Luis Castillo and signing Robbie Ray last year, we did make a lot of big investments. So we spent about $500 million over the course of the last year or so in future commitments. And our biggest thing is making sure that as we continue to get better and we continue to watch this roster evolve, is sustaining that. You know, with a lot of good young 0 to 3s that will eventually hit arbitration. You know, we're trying to manage our payroll flexibility 5 and 6 years down the line as equally as we are today. So we'll be conscious of that as we go.
So Jerry talked about how JP, their great preference is for them to be their shortstop, which is of course what we've heard from him for the last couple of years.
You know, JP is our shortstop.
And also when talking about free agency, he told John Paul Morosi that he would much rather use free agency as a way to augment the roster instead of adding that big name player. They've already spent a ton of money on a bunch of in-house players. With that being said, none of that seems conducive to signing some of the biggest name free agents on the market this year, instead going after some of the mid-road free agents such as like a Brandon Nimmo. Because of this, I think we need to look at the price that some of these shortstops would be asking for on this market. And over on The Athletic, they actually went over and looked at some of the contract predictions for these players. Let's start here with Carlos Correa. As you can see, he has the Mariners as one of the best fits for Carlos Correa. He says contract prediction is 10 years, $327 million, meaning you're spending about $33 million a year on this one player. That is not cost effective if you're the Mariners. Of course, you're locking up a lot of payroll over the next few years, and Jerry Dipoto specifically said they don't want to do that. They don't want to have to budget their money over the next couple of years when the Mariners could be in a big window of contention just because they decided they wanted to add a shortstop. The Mariners had this problem when they had guys like Robinson Cano, Nelson Cruz, Felix, and Kyle Seager. All their money was wrapped up in really 4 players, and they couldn't afford to go out and get anyone else. Carlos Correa asking for $33 million a year is just not conducive to the Mariners' strategy over the next 5-10 years when they want to look like a dynasty team. Next is my personal favorite free agent on the market, Trea Turner, and even in this article they said he can play second base in addition to shortstop, and that increases his value. A team such as the Mariners, who want to keep JP at shortstop, would love to land Turner to play second base. I completely agree. Turner would be my absolute dream player to add this offseason. But with that being said, they think that he'll be asking for 8 years and $264 million, which is also a $33 million a year value, which again, I just talked about why that's not really a good idea for the Mariners in the front office's eyes. I personally would love to see them add Trea Turner, but if the front office doesn't think it's a good idea to wrap all that money up in one player when they can go out and augment the roster in other ways and maybe trade for a lesser known but still valuable second baseman, I think that we might not be getting any of these shortstops. Next up is Xander Bogaerts, and not a shock here, you still see the Mariners listed as the best fits. They're expecting Bogaerts to get a 7-year, $196 million deal, which is $28 million a year in annual value. So a little bit cheaper than we expect with Trea Turner and Carlos Correa, but that's still $28 million, which would make him the second highest paid player on your roster. Obviously, Julio is going to be, over the next 10 or so years, the highest paid player. Then you have guys like Castillo and Ray all making $20+ million a year, and I just think that adding Bogaerts to that as well is going to really up the ante in terms of how much money they're willing to spend. And finally, you have shortstop Dansby Swanson here, and you can see the Mariners once again under the best fits. With a 6-year, $154 million deal, that would equate to about a $25.5 million a year average annual value. Again, the cheapest of the shortstops, but also probably the lightest hitting of all the shortstops. So are the Mariners willing to spend all this money on one certain player to fix a position that they may not even have a problem with in the first place? Or do they want to go out and trade for a younger guy like a Brandon Brandon Rogers, like a Jazz Chisholm if he's available, so on and so forth, or even bring back Adam Frazier and hope that he can have a bounce back year and be worth a lot more than they're willing to pay him. Now, don't get me wrong here. Don't get me wrong saying the Mariners don't have enough money to make this happen. The Mariners make billions of dollars a year. They could be at the top of the payroll threshold if they wanted to be. They could push the luxury tax. They could be a top of the market team. Don't listen to anyone that says they're mid-market, because the Mariners make a ton of money and they basically are one of the biggest teams in terms of free agents willing to sign somewhere right now. You would think anyway, as people can probably see exactly how big this window that is open is for the Seattle Mariners. Obviously making the playoffs for the first time in 20 years last year, and you could play with Julio Rodriguez for the rest of your career. I mean, who wouldn't want that? But based on DePoto's comments, it really seems like they might go a trade route for a second baseman or a shortstop instead of going free agency, unless the right guy walks through the door at the right price. He even talked about JP's willingness to move to second if they had to, and I think that saying JP is going to be your shortstop isn't very conducive to getting one of these free agents to want to sign with you this year. In my opinion, JP Crawford has not given you enough. Of course he's a vocal leader. Of course he is a great person in that clubhouse, and he really is one of the backbones of the team. But defensively and even offensively, JP Crawford is not good enough to stake his claim at shortstop. Wouldn't you rather sign somebody like Trea Turner and give them full rights over shortstop and then just move JP to second? JP is in no position to really fight that. He's hitting he hit 250 or something like that, and was really not that great of a player. I'm sure every single one of these players would rather play shortstop than they would any other position. That's the position they've been playing, it's the position they're comfortable with. And thinking JP is the one that has to stay at shortstop, it just doesn't make any sense to me. He's not a good enough player to warrant it. I agree, he's a great team leader, he's a vocal leader, and he's really good at shortstop. But if you can sign somebody like Carlos Correa, he's better at shortstop. If Trea Turner walks through that door, he may not be as good at shortstop as JP Crawford, but by golly, he's going to augment your lineup so much more. You have to give Trea Turner what he wants instead of keeping JP Crawford at shortstop. And maybe up the middle infield is not where they want to spend most of their money. Maybe they don't want to hand out a big contract to one of these shortstops that's going to tie their hands behind their back in terms of payroll over the next decade or so. It's possible they would rather go and look for somebody in the corner outfield, and I have a video right now on Brandon Nimmo and the GM meetings. I appreciate you guys watching this one, and go Mariners.